Have you been to Narnia? I have. I have been through the wardrobe and stepped into the snowy woods. I've seen the lamppost in the clearing, and I've seen the White Witch. I've walked through the endless winter, and I have met Aslan. Today on Book vs. Movie, I'm covering the great children's book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, by C.S. Lewis, published in 1950, and comparing the book to the Disney adaptation from 2005. Back before Harry Potter, if you wanted to point to the best children's fantasy series, you'd most likely have pointed to the Narnia books. When I was a kid, box sets of the Narnia books were kind of ubiquitous. I had a set, and I have no idea where they came from or how I got them. If you were a kid who liked to read, you probably had read some or all of the books. As I was a kid in the 80s, I also had the benefit of watching the BBC production of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which played here in the States on PBS. I even had a battered copy on VHS that I watched many times, and I think my concept of Aslan was formed from the one in the BBC production. I was quite happy to come back to the book for a reread after so many years. It's kind of funny, I remember it being much longer, an epic novel, but I polished it off this time in just an evening. To young me, it probably was an epic, though. I think the proper age for these books to blow your mind is 9 or 10 or so. So let's get to the book. The book begins with the 4 Pevensie children, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, being sent off to live in the great house of an old professor in the country during World War II. While exploring the large old house one rainy day, Lucy hides in a wardrobe full of old fur coats. She goes further back into the wardrobe until she steps out the back and into the snowy forest of Narnia. In a clearing of the forest, she sees a lit lamppost. By the lamppost, Lucy meets a faun named Mr. Tumnus, who is very surprised to meet a human child, but he invites her back to his place for tea. In his comfortable home, they have tea, and the faun plays music on his pipe, causing Lucy to drift to sleep. When she wakes, Mr. Tumnus is having a fit of conscience and explains to Lucy that he was under orders to hand over any human children he found to the White Witch, who currently rules Narnia and is the cause of the endless winter, but that he has decided he won't do it. He lets Lucy return home, and she goes back through the wardrobe, only to find herself back just a moment after she'd left. None of her siblings believe her when she tells them what happened, thinking she made it up. Then, playing hide-and-seek another rainy day, Lucy goes back into the wardrobe, this time followed by her brother Edmund, who's hoping to catch her in her lie, and instead they both come out into Narnia. Lucy is already gone by the time Edmund comes out, and he meets up instead with the White Witch in a sleigh. The witch coerces Edmund to tell her about his siblings, giving him a magical hot drink and a box of Turkish delight of a kind that is enchanted such that he will always want more. He eats it all, and she insists that he can get more Turkish delight if he brings all of his siblings back with him to see her. Then she drives off in the sleigh. Edmund meets up with Lucy, and they go back. When they meet up with Susan and Peter, and Lucy talks about Narnia again, Edmund pretends it was all just Lucy's imagination, leaving Lucy bereft until finally sometime later all 4 of them go through the wardrobe and find themselves in Narnia. Donning old fur coats from the back of the wardrobe, they set off into Narnia, only to find the faun Mr. Tumnus has been arrested for aiding a human. They're helped by the charming set of talking beavers, who explain that the 4 children are part of a prophecy, that the White Witch's power will fail when 4 humans sit in the 4 thrones of Castle Cair Paravel. Further, they explain that Aslan, the king of the wood, has been seen in Narnia for the first time in a long while. In the middle of this explanation, Edmund disappears, and they think he has betrayed them all and gone to the White Witch. They leave in a hurry, knowing the witch will send her wolves after them, since the prophecy can't come true if she kills them. They head towards Aslan's camp, where his followers have gathered. Edmund makes his way to the castle of the White Witch and finds the courtyard full of the statues of creatures she had turned to stone. Edmund is taken prisoner and is hauled off by the witch to go after his siblings. This proves difficult as the return of Aslan has broken the long winter of Narnia, and spring returns, making a trip by sleigh difficult. Meanwhile, Susan, Peter, and Lucy have gone with the beavers and are met by Father Christmas, who is able to return to Narnia now that the White Witch's power has diminished with the return of Aslan. He gives special gifts to the children. To Peter he gives a sword, to Susan a bow and a horn that will bring help when blown, and to Lucy a cordial that will cure anyone, even close to death. They all make their way to the camp of Aslan and finally meet the great lion himself. Aslan is described as both great and terrible, royal and solemn. They're interrupted by the attack of one of the queen's wolves, and Peter uses his sword to kill the wolf. Aslan's company chase the other wolf back to where he met with the witch and frees Edmund from her. Edmund is taken back to camp where he reunites with Peter, Susan, and Lucy. The witch then comes to Aslan's camp and demands Edmund's life, as she is due the lives of all traitors by the old magic of Narnia. Aslan speaks with her alone and they make a deal, freeing Edmund from his obligation. That night, Susan and Lucy can't sleep, and when they leave their tent, they see Aslan walking out of camp. They ask to walk with him, and he agrees, telling them they must stop when he tells them to. He is depressed on the walk, though he won't say the reason. He leaves Susan and Lucy on the edge of the hilltop where the stone table sits, now surrounded by the White Witch and her horde. Aslan gives himself up to them, allowing them to shear his great mane and tie him to the table. He has given himself up in Edmund's stead, and the White Witch gladly takes him as sacrifice in Edmund's place. The witch kills Aslan, and then she and her horde leave him there. Susan and Lucy go to tend his body, helped by field mice who chew through the ropes binding him to the table. They are dejected, having watched the great and mighty Aslan give himself up for their own brother's treachery. But then they hear a great cracking sound and go to see what happened, only to find the stone table broken and Aslan standing near it, resplendent and alive. Aslan explains that the older magic held that a willing sacrifice of a blameless victim could revert the magic of the table. He leaves with Susan and Lucy to breathe life back into the statues of the White Witch's castle, so that they can join the battle with Aslan's army against that of the White Witch. They join the battle just in time, turning the tide and winning the day. Edmund strikes down the White Witch's magic wand, stopping her from turning anyone else to stone, but becoming mortally wounded in the process. Aslan himself pounces on and kills the White Witch. Lucy saves Edmund with a cordial that Father Christmas had given her, as well as others wounded in battle. And the 4 children are finally taken to Cair Paravel and placed on their thrones. They rule Narnia for many years, gradually forgetting their old lives, until one day they're hunting a stag in the wood and come again upon the lamppost. They have no memory of it, but get off their horses to examine it, and walk through the wood, only to tumble out of the wardrobe, back again in the large house in the country, where they are children again. They feel obliged to explain to the old professor the loss of the 4 fur coats. He tells them not to worry about the old coats, and that they likely won't be able to get back to Narnia through the wardrobe, but will most likely go back again someday. And that's where the book leaves off, the story to be continued in Prince Caspian. The line "The Witch in the Wardrobe" is somewhat obviously a Christian allegory. This was not a big deal for me as a kid. I was raised a bit of a heathen with no specific religion. My parents had ditched their own organized religions in college, and opted to let us grow and choose our own religion, which is an interesting thing to do. If you're not forced into a religion, you end up with something like a traveler's perspective. You see both the flaws and the qualities of the religions around you, and more importantly, you respect the religions around you. So when I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as a kid, it was as a person who had never endured Sunday school or who had gone to church. Even so, the death and resurrection of Aslan was pretty obviously about Jesus Christ, and I kind of just shrugged it off. Aslan is dead for about 5 minutes before he pops back to life, so as much as the scene of ritual sacrifice was a bit jarring for a kid's book, at least it was a short one. And later in life, once I reached adulthood, I did actually find God. I am essentially Christian now, and I go to church once in a while, and generally enjoy it when I do. Now, when I read the book as an adult, I can see all the other small Christian references scattered throughout. They are cleverly layered into the story, and I think they're not supposed to be clear to kids. They're in there for adults to find, tucked away for their enjoyment like a Christian Where's Waldo. When I was a kid, I thought Turkish Delight must be absolutely amazing because Edmund couldn't get enough of the stuff. The book laid it on pretty thick about how no matter how much he got, he would continue to want more. But now as an adult, I'm like, hey, Edmund is Judas. The book is using Edmund as the betrayer and substituting in Turkish Delight for 30 pieces of silver. Turkish Delight is money. It's clever. And when Aslan is walking to his known doom at the stone table, I'm pretty sure he's walking through the Stations of the Cross, the highly ritualized account of the procession of Jesus on his way to crucifixion. I don't think it's a complete run of all the 14 traditional stations, but Aslan's procession with Susan and Lucy definitely touches on a few of them. When the book described Aslan stumbling on the way to the stone table, I got a hint of the similarity. Just in case you're not familiar, the series of stations of the cross are as follows. 1. Jesus is condemned to death. 2. He is made to bear his cross. 3. He falls for the first time. 4. He meets his mother. 5. Simon of Cyrene is made to bear the cross. 6. Veronica wipes Jesus' face. 7. He falls the second time. 8. The women of Jerusalem weep over Jesus. 9. He falls the third time. 10. He is stripped of his garments. 11. He is nailed to the cross. 12. He dies on the cross. 13. He is taken down from the cross. And 14. He is placed in the sepulchre. In The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Susan and Lucy can't sleep and go out to find Aslan. They ask to walk with him and he agrees. He walks dejected and stumbles. He asks the girls to lay a hand on his mane as they walk because he is lonely. When he stops to leave them at the edge of the forest, they weep and kiss his face. Aslan goes to the stone table where the witch's minions shear his mane and bind him to the stone table, where he dies. The stone table itself calls up references to the altar at which Abraham was commanded by God to sacrifice his son. Abraham was about to do it, having bound his son and placed him on the altar, before God interjects and tells Abraham to kill a ram instead to sacrifice. The breaking of the stone table signifies the end of sacrifices, the idea being that Aslan, like Jesus, has paid the toll for everyone going forward. Lewis wrote the Narnia series to help give Christian children a slightly easier entry into the role of Christ. Young heathen me could attest to the fact that the paintings and statues of a bleeding and tortured Jesus on the cross are not images designed to ease one into a world of spirituality and religion. I think Lewis made Aslan as a way of explaining to his own younger self a religion he had come to love after having left it for a time. He also didn't see Aslan as a direct, one-to-one copy of Jesus, but rather an analog for a world of Narnia. If a world of talking animals had a king and a savior, it was going to be a talking lion. The Narnia books absolutely can be read purely as a set of children's fantasy novels, and a lot of kids seem to not even notice the Christian overtones. I found myself thinking about this a lot. Can you separate out the Christianity from the story of Narnia? What do you have left if you do that? The answer is the Disney adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe from 2005. Given their need to cater to an exceptionally diverse international audience, Disney de-Christianized the movie as much as they could, while still keeping the bulk of the story intact. The resulting movie is fine. There's nothing really wrong with it. The movie looks good, the CGI is very nice. The movie leaves the story pretty much intact. The child actors are sweet, but they and the film are both utterly forgettable. I just saw the movie, and I can't remember large parts of it. And yet there's nothing really wrong with the movie. I can't say it was bad. It was just fine. Somewhere in the middle. Not good, not bad. In the film, the Pevensie children go out to the country and stay in the grand old house. Lucy finds Narnia while hiding in the wardrobe, and meets Mr. Tumnus, who in a strange casting choice is a somewhat buff, shirtless young James McAvoy. Lucy goes back to tell everyone, and they don't believe her. Edmund follows her in the second time, only to meet the White Witch, played by Tilda Swinton. She gives him some Turkish delight, and then he and Lucy go back. Edmund pretends nothing happened, and then they all four end up going through into the wardrobe. They find Tumnus's home ransacked and him arrested. The beavers help them evade the wolves sent by the White Witch. Edmund runs off to the Queen, only to be jailed with hot Mr. Tumnus. Peter, Susan, Lucy, and the beavers run into a fox, who puts the wolves off their trail, and stops with them to talk about Aslan. They all go off to meet Aslan, and are chased across a frozen river in a scene meant to invoke the Lord of the Rings by what turns out to be Father Christmas, who duly gives gifts. Then they're chased across another frozen river by wolves, while the river is in the process of thawing, giving a large dramatic scene where all of them fall into the river and nearly drown, only to pop up again just fine a second later. Spring comes to Narnia, and the three finally meet Aslan and his army. The wolves attack Susan, and Peter kills a wolf with his new sword. Aslan's forces follow the remaining wolf back to the witch and save Edmund. The White Witch comes to demand Edmund back as her due, and Aslan makes the deal in place of Edmund. Aslan dies and comes back. He, Susan, and Lucy go wake the statues in the witch's castle, and they all go into the final battle. The good guys win, the witch is destroyed, and the four kids are placed on the thrones at Cair Paravel, to rule over Narnia as the prophesied rulers. They find the lamppost again many years later and tumble back out of the wardrobe as children again. The biggest problem with the Disney adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is that it's really trying to be The Lord of the Rings. They added action scenes, most notably the scene of them being chased across a frozen river by Father Christmas, which looks nearly identical to chase scenes from The Lord of the Rings. And the entire soundtrack for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe sounds like a poor man's version of the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. Almost every musical theme from The Lord of the Rings has a close cousin in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Peter gets a sword, it sounds like Aragorn getting Anduril. And in the final battle, they really want Peter to be Aragorn, having him ride into battle on horseback, despite the fact that Peter has probably never done anything close to that, because he's a school kid from London. I get the desire to try and replicate the success of Lord of the Rings, but it's a strange series of books to try and turn into an epic. C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were close friends when they wrote their respective works, and I think they would both have found it funny for Disney to try and fit Lewis's Christian parable into the mold of his friend's Norse-inspired epic saga. Driven by curiosity, I rewatched the 1988 BBC production of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the entirety of which can now be found on YouTube. Since I hadn't seen it in over 30 years, I kind of expected it to have aged poorly, but instead I found just the opposite. I vastly and overwhelmingly prefer the BBC adaptation to the Disney one. It has a few important advantages. First and foremost, it is a stunningly accurate adaptation of the book. Huge portions are almost line-for-line reproductions of the text, which is almost unheard of when producing a film adaptation. It's the single most faithful adaptation of a book I think I've ever seen. This is a positive because the original is a terrific piece of writing where nothing was superfluous, and it works beautifully as a piece of drama. That's the second thing the BBC does well, in that it treats the story like good theater. The emphasis is on the singular performances from each person, making sure that each character is distinct and well-defined. Peter is a strict, no-nonsense leader. Susan is a practical worrier. Edmund is a mean little snot, and Lucy is pure wonder. There is no possibility of confusing any of these people, unlike in the Disney one, where I honestly couldn't remember Edmund at all and could have easily swapped him and Peter and not noticed. I liked that Edmund in the BBC version is such a mean little brat. If he's not, then you have nothing to set up his rather huge betrayal of his own siblings. The Disney film tries to walk back Edmund's cruelty, but in doing so they rob the story of its motivation. Mr. Tumnus in the BBC adaptation is really the example of how the part needs to be played. Disney thought they needed to cast someone younger to make him look less questionable. But if you watch Geoffrey Perry in the BBC one, you can see his full range of conflicted emotions as he gives Lucy tea. He's an older person, which is necessary for this kind of mental battle. James McAvoy was too young and honestly too good-looking for Mr. Tumnus. His overly hot fawn is the only thing I remember from the first time I saw the movie back in 2006 or whatever. He was distracting from the rest of the film. About Tilda Swinton as the White Witch, I'd honestly forgotten she was in the movie at all until I watched it again. I like Tilda Swinton a lot in pretty much everything I've seen her in, but I think she was a bit swamped in this role. She's terrific at subtle stuff, and this role calls for big gesture, swing for the fences kind of acting. It's why I really like Barbara Kellerman's White Witch with all her cartoony, evildoer charm. She shouts most of her lines, and for some reason this works just fine. Rewatching Tilda Swinton in the Disney one, I realized that she kind of gets lost in the scenery. She's a pale white woman with blonde hair in a white dress on a white snowy background. And her dresses are strange. There's one with a hugely oversized cup bodice, and another she wears to the sacrifice that is a big black claw thing over her shoulder. I spent far too much time thinking about her dresses, which meant that they were pulling focus from the actress. Kellerman had one ensemble, and at no point did it distract from her, partly because she made sure to shout all her lines. And again, this is a good thing. Her White Witch is a bad guy, and there's no mistaking that. Lucy in the BBC version is kind of amazing. She's not a beautiful little puppet, but she's 100% committed to being Lucy. She loves Narnia, and she loves Aslan. She has the deep internal conviction of the true faithful. Really, Sophie Wilcox's Lucy is a great young performance. It was a pleasure to see her again after so many years. Next to this, the Disney Lucy is utterly forgettable. A talking doll. And then there's Aslan. Getting Aslan right is absolutely essential if you're going to do a Narnia movie. Aslan is a big, comforting, fluffy god who is kind and approachable. Disney's Aslan is just a lion. I don't know how Disney got Aslan wrong, but he's just a lion. As much as I like Liam Neeson's voice and agree that it's leonine, it's also instantly recognizable as Liam Neeson's voice, which distracts immediately from the character who is supposed to be the part god of Narnia. You hear it and you think, oh, that's Liam Neeson. The BBC production used a puppet for Aslan, with the voice by the venerable actor Ronald Pickup. This puppet is amazing. I thought I wouldn't be impressed by Aslan as an adult, but the lion is incredible. He's mesmerizing. It helps that the voice was slow, melodic, and carried the undertone of the lion's growl. Aslan on his slow walk to the stone table with Susan and Lucy is heartbreaking in the BBC show. Somehow the gorgeous puppet is truer to the concept of Aslan than an actual lion, no matter how good the CG. Disney ran into a similar problem with their live-action remake of The Lion King. Where the original had a beautiful cartoon lion for Simba, the remake with realistic animals makes them less interesting and somehow less majestic than the original. Similarly, Aslan the Talking Lion inspires no awe, no reverence. He's not even impressive. I think he's even overshadowed by his centaur commander Oreus. And this is a small quibble from someone who grew up in a place that had snow, but the BBC had the children walk through snow in Narnia, and the snow looks like snow, and maybe more importantly, sounds like snow. Winter is palpable, and it looks both cold and wet in a way that's realistic. If you're showing a land where it's always winter, but it looks like a fake, fluffy Hollywood winter, you're not really getting at the curse that is an endless winter. The BBC production was shot on what was for them a large budget of over £1 million. Compare that to the Disney film that cost $180 million to shoot. It turns out the money doesn't matter. The BBC production is the superior production of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. They weren't trying to shoehorn the story into a stamped-out mold for The Lord of the Rings. They were just trying to make a very good adaptation of the book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I suspect that you could give the BBC £2 million tomorrow, and they'd still come back with a beautiful, faithful adaptation of the book. Again, there's nothing seriously wrong with the Disney movie, but there's also nothing much right about it. The movie exists. It's okay. It made the studio enough money that they made a sequel of Prince Caspian, which I might cover someday. So for book versus movie, I'm going to give this to the book by C.S. Lewis. It's a great book that will continue to be a great book long into the future. And if you like the book, maybe watch the BBC adaptation. The Disney version is fine for a day where you have nothing else to do or a long flight. It takes out most of the religion, so you won't find it offensive, but it leaves nothing in its place, just a corporate bottom line. As for side notes, Turkish Delight is actually pretty great. When I finally found it as an adult, I was thrilled, as at long last I could finally have the opportunity to know what's so great about this stuff. If you've never had it, it's a chewy jelly candy that often has nuts in it. It's like the Western version of mochi. I've since found it in a few shops, and have had the luxury stuff, which comes in big rolls with nougat or chocolate mixed in. I can't say I'd sell out my siblings for a box, but it is quite good. There's a wealth of information about C.S. Lewis, whole fields of scholarship devoted to studying his many books, essays, and Christian writings. I don't think that a person needs to know any of this to enjoy his Narnia books, though. The books don't need or benefit greatly from literary context. They can even be enjoyed separately from Christian entanglement, though you can see more of the clever parallels if you have read the Bible. You also don't need to know anything about Lewis himself. His world of Narnia is beautiful and separate from him. The only interesting bit I will mention is that Lewis was attached to the concept of talking animals from the time he was a child. Inspired by stories from Beatrix Potter, he and his brother W.H. Lewis wrote a book together as children entitled Boxin, about a world of talking animals who wore clothes. This is interesting both as a way to make yourself feel like an absolute gob who has accomplished nothing in your life by comparing them to the work of an 8-year-old C.S. Lewis, and as the idea of where Narnia probably started. I like to think about C.S. Lewis always having the world of Boxin in the back of his mind, so that when he truly came back to the church as an adult, he felt the need to give his world of talking animals their own version of Jesus Christ, like he was bestowing spiritual salvation on his entire fictional world. Aslan was the final piece to complete and perfect his world. And that's it for me today. Thanks for listening. This is Rose-Colored Movies.
Are you with me?
To the death.